Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. And while the patch notes for the June release didn't really show a lot of interesting stuff, what actually happened in the game is quite interesting because the drifters have apparently started a pretty large invasion in Nullsec. They're actually going after structures as well. So that is something that might be a little bit controversial. It's definitely a pretty ballsy move, I would say, from CCP, where they actually decide to go after assets that previously would have been considered somewhat safe by the players, right? Structures, 3 timers normally takes a lot of time to take that down, and it feels like the structures are quite safe, and to see NPC forces go after them definitely shakes things up. For now, I think it's going to be in Nullsec. I personally expect that it's going to be restricted in Nullsec, and perhaps, I mean, my thinking would be that this would indeed be a way to clear out inactive and unused structures in a way. So if they would go after 2 timers and then not the 3rd timer, basically as long as you've got services running, you're keeping the structure fueled, it is less likely that they will destroy them. So I'm not really sure how it's all going to work out, of course, because CCP has said absolutely nothing, which I personally really like. Have an emergent story, have players actually experience what they have planned for the game rather than data mined beforehand on CC and beaten before it's out. So yeah, very cool stuff. Very brave decision, I think, from CCP to try something like this, and especially in Nullsec. And yeah, we'll see how all of that evolves. Of course, sounds pretty good to me. On a personal note, I also got a pretty massive donation. I'm not sure if I should mention any names, but a player who says he's quitting gave me like 10 billion ISK. That's gonna keep the services running for a very nice long time in Dital. And yeah, thank you very much for that. Now, of course, we all know that people don't quit EVE, they only take breaks even when they think that they're quitting EVE. At some point we do expect them back, but we'll see how that works out, of course. But yeah, thank you very much for the support there. Definitely very much welcome. Allows me to just keep buying lots of fuels, maybe even put up an extra structure if something new would come out. So definitely very nice. Next up, a quick look at the New Eden store, where we do have a pretty large sale, in the sense that, well, for the first time we've got like several pages of ships on sale here, although it is only for the Ghostburst skin, and here Hurricane Sebiester skin looks really amazing, but these are already pretty cheap skins that are basically down like 6 plex. That's not that much for these small skins, but it is a sale, of course. You can see here also Flycatcher Ghostburst skin, Osprey Ghostburst skin. I think that looks pretty damn cool. If you like the white versions of skins, and these actually have some black tones there as well, this is definitely something you could look into. There's even the Avatar Cannon skin. Here it becomes a bit more sizable in the size of the sail. Same here with the Wyvern Ghostburst skin, although maybe it feels a little bit too white grayish. Charon, if you want to stand out for the gankers or go out in style, then Charon and Rhea skins are pretty interesting as well. Chimera, yeah, that actually still looks pretty decent here with the black at front and the back. So definitely pretty big sale, Kaldari focused, and if you like the white skins, pretty damn nice to take a look at. Next up, we are gonna move on to the market, of course. That's why everyone is here, and we'll start with Plex and stuff at 4 minutes. 400. And at the moment I finally received the email about a Plex sale before I start recording EVE Talk, so not unexpectedly here we see a downtrend and we see an increase in volume. So it's only like a 15% sale on Plex. I think it's for 1 week, but that will of course have its impact on the Plex market. You can see that the volumes increase because people do take advantage of that, bring more Plex to the market, and as a result the chart is actually diving below 4 million on today's daily average. If we take a look at the GDAP prices, Plex are selling for 4,020,000 ISK, buyers are coming in at just below 4 million ISK, and then if we go to the player owned trade hubs, well, the competition is very fierce but staying above 4 million, 4,017,000 ISK here, and then the buyers, they actually also go up to 3,940,000. So people are point oneing each other all over Jita and all over the player owned structures, just one jump out, and it's right on 4 million where the battle is taking place. And that's really an important one actually, because if some sellers or enough sellers finally decide that they've had enough of these games and they want to be sure of their sale and they do actually dive below 4 million ISK, that's when we could really break through this and start to move down. So it's also a sale that lasts 1 week. I think next week's EVE Talk could be very interesting when it comes to the movement of plex. The multiple pilot training certificate apparently also on sale. That becomes very interesting as well. Look at that volume increase. Of course, this is typical for a CCP intervention, and diving down from 2 billion ISK to now 1.6 billion. Well, quite a bit above that, 37 million above that, but let's call it around 1.6 billion. And then the buyers are actually below 1.6 billion already at 1.560. If we look for that on the chart, that's around here. Very interesting one. Definitely an opportunity. We saw that the last times as well, with one note to make, of course. What you see here, sale, sale, sale. If CCP keeps coming out with lots of sales throughout the summer, then you might be sitting on those pilot training certificates for a very long time, because, well, the numbers, of course, once the price reaches that 2 billion ISK, are very bad. You don't sell a lot of these multiple pilot training certificates. But this one, of course, moves not just percentage wise, but also in pure ISK. This is like 400 million ISK down from a couple of weeks ago on the sell side. So this is an opportunity where timing the bottom is very important, and where, in my opinion, not going crazy with the volumes is also very important, but potentially a nice opportunity. Next up, we have the skill extractor. Let's take a look at that, heading for 450, also under pressure in the last couple of days because of the plex sale, of course. 468 million for the sellers, 443 for the buyers. Still quite expensive, of course. Let's see what happens in the upcoming week, of course, as the sale makes its way through the market. After that, we have our injectors. Here is the large scale injector, staying pretty flat at 1 billion ISK, or just below that. Very interesting that it's able to defend its price so well. 1,026 million for the sellers, 979 million for the buyers. Yeah, it looks like the announcement, the controversial announcement of a pack with 1 million free skill points did not really have an impact on the market. I must also say that I think the grievances that the player had with the pack, that it was actually available not just for new players but potentially also for veteran players, is a bit of a problem. But CCP did address that. They recognized their mistake, and yeah, hopefully they don't keep making them, because people are quite on edge, of course, with the purchase from of CCP games by Pearl Abyss, that pay-to-win mechanics might eventually find their way in the game. It's very important there, I think, personally, that they do notify the CSM when they've got new plans like that, so that they can actually become the soundboard and basically a bit of a test for the reception that something like that will find in the general player base. I think that's actually one of the really important things that the CSM does, and I think that CCP should definitely take as much advantage of that as possible. Because it is pretty important, of course. The drama that comes of that is not just important, but also if they do end up making that mistake, it will, in my opinion, pretty much kill the game, because it will not be accepted by the player base. After that, we've got the small skill injectors, also flat just above 200 million ISK here, 205 for the sellers, 191 for the buyers. Bit of a margin opening up there though, so I do see that potential for a decrease in price in plex. It does need to break to that 4 million mark to also start to have its impact on the injector market. And then we've got the daily alpha injectors that are staying flat, I would say above average for the year. Probably its new normal price, 69 million for the sellers, 69 million for the first buyer, most at 62 million. So here definitely still very expensive, that injector market at the moment. Next up, we're moving on to some minerals coming in at 930. Let's take a look at those. I think the Imperium is retreating from their campaign at this point, presumably to fight off the drifters, but I do think that a large part of those players that would return home would start to mine as well. So obviously Tritanium is peaking, managed to get to almost 7 ISK. This is very important, definitely very impressive, I was going to say. Definitely above 6.5. Very nice opportunity there to sell. I am surprised surprised by the lack of movement in the volumes here, and we are declining a bit, but sellers are still at, let's see here, 644, almost 6.5 ISK, so that's still very expensive, very nice for people that are holding these stocks or that are mining at the moment. And then 594 for the buyers, almost 666 ISK, not bad either here. So a bit of a pushback, of course, after that very sharp increase in price in two steps. First from bottom prices at around 4.5 ISK, then moving up, breaking through the 5 barrier, and then after that through the 6 barrier. Not a bad movement. Let's see what the others are doing. Here is Pyrite, same pattern, a bit more of a downturn, I think. In this one, volumes still not moving anywhere. 440 for the sellers, 403 for the buyers, so we're heading back towards 4 ISK. It's still okay, but you can see that we're getting back to those average prices for the first part of the year here pretty quickly. After that we have Mexelon that worked its way back to 65 ISK, also coming under pressure. Sellers are back down to 62.32, and then the buyers are down to 56.75. That one is going back to a less than average price pretty quickly. Isogen did not move a lot, and as a result on increased volumes is now crashing towards a 1-year low point. Definitely a completely different picture from Tritanium. 14.76 for the sellers, 14.13 for the buyers. If we look for 14 ISK on the chart, that is below everything, so we're back very closely to a 1-year low point for Isogen. Let's see if Noxium has been able to hold on. Went above 325 for just a bit, but then of course the downturn is here in the price, back towards 300 ISK. 309 for the sellers, 295 for the buyers. Bit of a margin opening up here. Average price just around 300 ISK, and the real question is, are we going to be able to keep defending that range or not? Noxium has actually done very well over the last year to defend that 300 ISK price range. Next up we've got Zydrine, tried to move back towards 550, managed to stay in between the 5 and 550 range for now, but here at the tail end we can again see a bit of a downturn in the price. 515 for the sellers, 495 for the buyers, so buyers have gone below 500 ISK. And the question is, of course, how active will the Imperium get very quickly in their mining? How quickly will those operations get back to full swing, and then we'll actually probably see a bit more pressure show up on these minerals, even more than what we're seeing right now, because most of these actually are recovering from an increase in price due to that deployment. So yeah, they make a big part of the economy at the moment. And then of course another question that you can ask yourself, how disruptive will a drifter invasion like that be to potential production from the locals? I personally am really curious now. I mean, they were on deployment, so actually it might actually be not as big a deal for them that they can come back. They all still have warships and things like that ready to try and counter this invasion. But what would happen if they're in the full swing of things, everyone is in their orcals, and then you get a drifter invasion like that? We might actually see a very different impact on the market, because this one was actually front loaded by the deployment of the Imperium. So it could be interesting if this keeps going in nullsec. After that we've got Megasite continuing at a pretty bad price. Actually the one counter to all of these other minerals so far, up a little bit in the last couple of days. Now selling for 444, 421 for the buyers. This is basically, in my opinion, a mineral that is looking for its bottom price. How much below 450 are we going to settle for? But they're not willing to go much below 420, and as a result we get this jittery movement in the current range, and even a counter movement in the last couple of days where Megasite goes up, whereas all the other minerals are going down. Finally, we still have more fight as well, very flat on 9,000 ISK here, just below that for the sellers, and 8,800 ISK for the buyers. So here, well, we can see that better buy opportunities do exist, and unfortunately the war was not as big as we would have liked to see, not a breakout to 10 or 11,000 ISK on the Tech 2 ship losses. So here a muted, a small trade that could have been made for more fight, but now I think we should be in a wait and see pattern for the future of it. After that we have our PI market coming in at 1455. like that. And if you're hearing like my PC going extra hard with the cooling in the background, that's because there's actually a small heat wave going on in Belgium at the moment. Temperatures above 30 degrees Celsius. It's not something we're used to, and as a result this room is actually pretty damn hot. But let's get started on the PI materials. Here are the broadcast nodes back under pressure. Yeah, alright, we could have perhaps expected a slightly different move, with structures being destroyed first by the Imperium themselves and after that by the drifters. Potentially, I don't really know if they've actually destroyed any structures at this point, but broadcast nodes, are they really below 1.88 million? 1.9 million for the sellers, 1.8 million for one buyer, and then it's 1.6 million for the buyers. This is super cheap. 1.6 million is below the entire chart by quite a little bit, so I would say just buy one of these, get 1,000 of them. Alright, this one guy in perimeter is spoiling the party a little bit, but keep an eye on this, because potentially, I mean, you are buying for, let's say, 1.6 to 1.7 million. That would be an incredibly low price for the broadcast node. So advanced PI materials this time might be back under pressure. After that, we get the construction blocks. They are continuing to hover at, I would say, slightly below average price at this moment. 10,500 to 11,000 for the sellers, 10,255 for the buyers. Yeah, a bit below average, but it's not too dramatic just yet. Buyers are still above 10,000 disc. Then we've got consumer electronics that did well to get back to that 14,000 disc, but good times don't last forever, so we see a bit of pressure there again, and at the tail end actually a recovery after we bounced on 12,000 discs. So he's back up to 13,000 for the sellers, buyers at 12,300. What would that be? Slightly below average as well at this point. Coolants moving up a little bit for the week. That's very interesting. At the moment selling for almost 12,000 disc, 11,900, and then the buyers are at 11,250, making its way back to and above average price on the seller side for sure. So very interesting to see a bit of a comeback in the coolants, where most of the others here are actually under pressure. Enriched uranium is still doing quite nicely as well. 14,000 disc on the chart, 14,500 for the sellers, 13,800 for the first buyer, 13,500 for most. Definitely a nice range here at the moment, trading for a nice 14,000 disc, also related to fuels, of course. Integrity response drones had a nice comeback, went back to above 2.5 million ISK, but doesn't last too long. Sellers already just below 2.5 million, buyers at 2.4 million, so there's still quite a bit of interest for the integrity response drones, but you can see the pressure at the tail end here. Then mechanical parts for fuels, unfortunately also under pressure a bit. Alright, very interesting. Sellers coming in at 11,900 ISK, buyers at 11,750. That's a super narrow margin, so that must have been a bit of dumping. Not seeing too much on the volumes, but apparently lots of sellers coming to this market, bringing the price down very closely to the buyer market, bringing it back to an average range though. So this is not the time to panic. This is not a terrible price. This is just an average price for mechanical parts. Nuclear reactors next, after reaching an actual bottom of 80,000 disc here on super low volumes. Sellers are back to 91,000 disc, so up a little bit. More than 10% actually, and then the buyers are still at 80,000 discs. So this is just a little bit of a drying up of the sellers at this point, and you can see that we're already going back down as people want to get rid of their nuclear reactors. The volumes are just so bad that any increase in price gets smashed by new supply immediately. Organic mortar applicators, also one that had a nice comeback up to 1.2 million. At the tail end we can see that go back down a little bit, 1.1 million now for the sellers, a bit above that, just below that for the buyers. So here again, quite a decent amount of demand still, because buyers and sellers are very close to each other at a price of around 1.1 million, around its average. So we've seen worse times for organic mortar applicators. Robotics tied to fuels working their way back to 110,000 again. Sellers are at 105,000 though, but that's last 24 hours. Yeah, quite a bit coming in here, trying to take advantage of that spike, I guess. And then the buyers are still above 100,000 disc. Very respectable price, and actually not as volatile as this chart makes it look like. 95 to 110,000 disc as the highest and lowest ranges is not that much of a difference. Next up, self-harmonizing power cores also worked its way back to an above average price, above 2.1 million. around average, slightly above average. And you can see again in the last week or so that it's got to give back those winnings. 2 million for the sellers, 1.9 million for the buyers. Here margin is opening up again, so we get a bit of that mixed picture. Those that did not go up well above average, like the broadcast notes, are now going back down quite sharply, and then those that did manage to work their way up to a decently above average price and actually managed to stay there for a bit, are actually still in the process of recovering and have a very narrow margin between sellers and buyers. Superconductors next, still flat at 12,000 ISK, 12,850 actually for the sellers, so I expect to see a bit of a bump up here at the tail end or in the next week, and then 11,900 for the buyers. It's actually still a pretty damn good price for superconductors. Test cultures next, slowly crawling its way away from those 6,000 ISK price ranges. 8,300 now for the sellers, 6,600 over the buyers. So that's a very large margin opening up here. Buyers are not really willing to move up in price here. And this is almost something, if you manage to grab some very close to this buy price, sell it now, you're actually making a bit of a profit. And markets don't tend to stay in that situation for very long. So I think that actually sellers will start to work those prices back down quite a bit very quickly. After that we get to Witware mainframes, also one that went up in price but not really substantially above average or anything like that, and so you can see that decline here is quite a bit sharper. 2.16 million for the sellers, 1.9 million for the buyers, and so that margin opened up quite a bit, gave more potential for a downtrend, and it is definitely happening. So the PI market has a bit of a mixed picture, and there's not really any major lines that we can detect there actually, except that the advanced PI materials are definitely under pressure, but a lot of them are settling in different relative places. Next up, advanced wound materials coming in at 22 minutes. Like that. Let's take a look at that with the deployment of the Imperium over and their burning of a region over. We might see a bit of a movement, but from the look at the first one here is crystalline carbonite actually up to 160 here on the chart on one day. It looks like that will be delayed, and that's I think pretty normal for moon materials, because you do of course still need to make stuff happen in nullsec and then have that make its way to the GTAT trade hub before it actually shows up here. So that might be interesting if you want to try and predict this market a little bit more. Crystalline carbonites up in price obviously, currently selling for 153 ISK. Buyers are up to 148, and that is still below average, but definitely away from this bottom price range that we've been languishing in like the last couple of months or so. So that's a nice little comeback, definitely on volumes as well. Ferrite carbide, same thing, right? Mid-May, bottom price of less than 125 ISK, now selling for 146, buyers at 140. If you look at this one-year chart, this is still below average, but at least we're away from that bottom price, and that's going to be the impact of the deployment. Unfortunately, now that it is over, I don't think we'll see any steps back up to higher price ranges. I could be wrong on that, but I think things will stabilize very quickly. After that, we've got titanium carbide that had a very nice spike, of course, due to deployment up to 275. That's 100 ISK increased here, more than 50%. Very nice. Went back down pretty quickly, of course, as people tried to take advantage of that, but settled at a decent range. 238 for the sellers, 225 for the buyers. This is still an above average price right now. And then we have tungsten carbide that's basically not moved that much, but also has not had this sustained bottom price range that is completely out of line with the rest of the chart. It's currently selling for 205, buyers at 193. That's not too much of a margin, and just a touch below average actually, so that's not so bad. Next up, we've got the photonic metamaterials. Yeah, continuing to be in a pretty bad spot. This is actually a bit of a surprise to me that these metamaterials, at least some of them, are just not really moving together with their counterparts. And this one went as low as 15,000 ISK and is now selling for 16,600 ISK, buyers at 16,500 ISK. So the margin has closed. We're up away from the bottom, but looking at the chart, we're still quite a ways away from average prices, so this is still pretty bad. Plasmonic metamaterials next. This one actually had a 1, 2, 3 step up towards its average, well, maybe even above average range of 2,500 disc, or 22,500 disc, sorry. 22,775 for the sellers, 20,300 for the buyers. So sellers are above average, buyers are probably around average, and the margin is, well, around 10%, is actually decently large here. After that, we have the non-linear metamaterials that also has this seesaw movement up towards, well, an above average price. We gotta be honest here. 28,400 for the sellers is definitely above average for the year, and then 28,000 for the buyers. That's actually a pretty narrow margin. So this market has basically been forced up to an above average price. Man, what a difference with the photonic metamaterials that are just not going anywhere. Interesting. Terahertz metamaterials next, staying below 25,000. This one is on its average and is not really budging. This pattern here does tend to show a pretty big oversupply situation. Basically, such a big volume is being brought to the market at a specific price that the market just cannot absorb that very quickly. You can see the volumes go down as well. So here, 24,200 for the sellers and 23,400 for the buyers, and it's just not really going anywhere at this point, but it's in a decent spot. And then we still have some other advanced moon materials to take a look at. Fermionic condensates flat for the last month or so at an around average price, just below 100,000 disc. Ferrogel is going back down after reaching 50,000 disc. That is not so great. 46,800 for the sellers and 44,900 for the buyers. Still not at the bottom, but it is starting to get close to that 45,000. So be careful. Perhaps there's even an opportunity there. Fullerized flat at a less than average price, not much to say on this one. Then hypersynaptic fibers, bit of decreasing volatility and actually going back to a less than average price, 12,800 for the sellers here. Nanotransistors, all right, an opposite movement, we like that. Second leg up towards 5,500 disc and definitely above average on this 1 yearly chart here. 5,600 for the sellers. You can see the lack of availability. Quick look at the player owned trade hubs, nothing there, and then buyers coming in at 5,500. They have been forced up. Nanotransistors, if you have some cheap ones lying around, which just about a month ago you could still have bought them for less than 5,000 disc, this would of course be the time to bring them to the market. So actually a sell opportunity here all of a sudden. Not a major one, but at least it's there. Phenolic composites continuing its wave at a well below average price, so that's not too great. Breaking back down to a less than 2,000 disc price. Ceramic fibers went up to an average price. Also has to give way again. 456 here. Still okay on the sellers, but definitely under pressure here as well. So another pretty mixed picture in advanced moon materials as well. Let's take a look at the impact on Tick 2 ships next. That's coming in at 2750. Like that, and the end of the deployment might mean the end of the destruction, and so I do expect to see quite a few of these prices under pressure. Here is the Aries continuing its way down, well below 30 million at this point. Sellers at 27.5 million, buyers at 25 million. That is where it starts to be interesting to maybe grab a couple for a later spike. After that, we've got the Basilisk, also nice June increase in price due to the war, but you can see that we're very quickly getting back to a less than average price. 240 million for the sellers, 223 for the buyers. Where would you, well, we'd love to buy them very close to 200 million for an actual bottom price. So we still have a ways to go here, but we're already trading back below average. Cerberus, 1, 2, 3 waves, basically still doing the very same thing, going back down at this point. How close to 200 million, 215 for the buyers, 238 for the sellers. You might almost try this. 215, spikes are up to 280, spikes, waves are up to 280, so this is almost an interesting price range already. But the pressure is being confirmed here. The Crow went up to 35 million as well at the tail end here. A bit of pressure down to 34 million for the sellers. Look at the availability. 100 here, 99 here. That's a lot of them. 27.4 for the buyers already. So they are willing to pull that price back down. I think it's inevitable that it's gonna happen. Next up, we get the Guardian. That one actually went to the bottom price earlier in the week, apparently. Very close to that bottom range. Let's take a quick look. Sellers 211 million, buyers below 200 million. If you want to front load a Guardian for a sale on the spikes, which do happen, right? 300 million, 280 million, 280 million, let's call it that. You're now buying them for less than 200 million. That is a very nice potential margin. But when will that happen? Of course, that is something that you can never know beforehand, unless you're in the know. Heretic next, pretty flat at 70 million. Not much to say on these interdictors. I thought they would move more than what they do. The Hound here also, right, 40 million quite often, working its way back to 30 million, so definitely a slow decline, but 28 million already for the buyers. So here I would again wait for that 25 million on the buy price. Ishtar finally working its way up, so went below 200 million ISK, and now this is over. I'm guessing here it could be Vexor Navy issue announcement that went, that was going to be nerfed. The goal there, of course, is to make it a bit more difficult for alpha clones to become botting accounts, to become effective botting accounts as well. So the Ishtar is actually an Omega one, and if you want to still rat and you're not a bot, and then of course the Ishtar might be your next go-to ship. And so we see a pretty sizable increase in price. That's actually a logic that makes sense, and I think I could have tried to take advantage of that if I had bought a couple of Ishtars definitely here below 200 million. They're now selling for 225, so that's definitely already a pretty decent profit that could have been taken. And yeah, unexpected actually move now that I think about it, because of the nerf of the Vexor Navy issue that's coming. After that we get the Manticore that is continuing to, well, nice double peak up to 40 million ISK. Is now working its way back down, of course. That doesn't last too long. 32.7 million for the sellers, 28.9 for the buyers. Are we over? Yeah, we actually are. You can look at these volumes. Let's take a look at the amounts that are here. That's quite a lot of Manticores, bring the price down very quickly from 44, 41, 40, 38, 38, 35, 34, and every time with a decent number of ships coming into competition, this is driving the price down very quickly, oversupplied, and we're already buying for less than 29 million ISK. Potentially, again, on this volatility, you could grab a couple of really cheap Manticores for the next spike, which potentially, as you can see here, 40 million ISK. So this one looks very interesting, just like with the Guardian, where basically the response has been a bit too overwhelming for the market. Next up, we get the Munin, flat at 250 million. There's not much to say here. Nemesis went up to 32.5 million. So this one, the least well performing stealth bomber over the course of the last conflict here. Flat at 29 million. Buyers are down to 24.4 million though. That is pretty much below the entire chart. So here, well, unfortunately, its potential is not as great as the previous ones, but you're already buying this well below the entire chart at pretty much a one-year low point. Onero's next, back on the decline as well, back to 180. Buyers are at 170, a complete lack of buyers. But as I've said, I don't really like the Onero's that much because of its terrible volumes. Then we get the Purifier. That was lovely. This is the Tech 2 chart that we want to see. Above 40 million, 1, 2, 3, 4 times almost. This one is definitely still a pretty respectable spike, especially if you look where we head after that. And that's that over response that I'm talking about here. Will it happen again? Well, we went to a really high spike, almost 45 million ISK. We're declining super quickly, especially on the second leg down here. The end goes pretty much vertical. That means that the sellers are back down to 33.5 million, but the buyers are already below 30 million at 29.2. They still have a little bit of room to go, but if more of them keep coming in the next week or so to crush all of this, and look at these volumes, 24, 17, 21, 20, 44, 25, 30, 20, that's a lot of Purifiers coming to the market here. If they keep that up for a couple of more days, we might actually see the buyers be driven down to another buy opportunity. Awesome. Saber, yeah, interdictor again. Would love to see these get back in the meta then, so that they can move a little bit more. Right now, well below average. Scimitar, surprisingly enough, a logistics cruiser that didn't make many waves. And then we get the Stiletto with a late spike as well, up to 40 million ISK, working its way back down. Actual bottom that we'd be looking for, probably 26, 27 million. Buyers are already at 26.3 million. So 266 right here. That's a lot for the market to absorb. that's definitely some potential in there as well. So yeah, with the changes to what's happening in nullsec at the moment, I would say that it is back time to keep a close eye on the tick 2 market and to try to spot those that are being overshot by producers, by investors, etc. They're just selling too quickly, too much too quickly, and thus creating an actual opportunity for you. That does happen, as you can tell right here. Next up, we have the Tech 3 market that's coming in at 35 minutes. Like that. And let's take a look at these. First of all, of course, the tactical destroyers. We've got the Confessor bounced back to 40 million, which I would personally consider to be the normal range. 40 million for the sellers, 35.6 million for the buyers. The one worrisome thing, 32, 24, 22, 23 down here. This is 50 here at 42 million, granted, but below 40 million, this is actually a decent amount of ships. It's not completely crazy, but it's a bit more than what I was expecting myself on this increased price. So, okay, we'll see what the others are doing. Next up here we get the Hecate going down to less than 45 million, hopefully landing towards that 40 million isk, 44.7 million for the sellers, 41 million for the buyers. And here, so we get that premium 10% more than the Confessor, and we've got that, well, double the ships in some sellers, 59 here, 50 here, 23 here, but overall this is still feeling okay, except this full page is from the last 24 hours. Still, this is normal. We are in a ship that is selling at a better price than the Confessor, so you're seeing more ships come in here. And the Confessor, let's call this one the average. I think that the 40 million range is where everyone is happy. You can see that it's a bit less than a full page. It's also slower in volumes, which is normal. Why bring in Confessors when you can bring Hecates? Next up, we get the Jackdaw. This one went up to 55 million and is now covering back to 40 million isk. 41 million for the sellers, 37.5 million for the buyers. We still have 68, 54. That's a bit too much. But the rest is not that dramatic, so also keep in mind where we come from. So a bit of an overreaction can be happening here, perhaps. Who knows, that might also be an opportunity if it manages to drive the price back down. But buyers are ready to swoop in at 37.5 already. They don't need much of a margin to be grabbing these Jackdaws apparently, so still nothing too crazy. And then finally we have the Zwepel that is, you know, around 40 million, up and down a bit. That's quite okay as well. 40.5 million for the sellers, 38 million for the buyers. There's one of 31. This is a healthy number. Last 24 hours coming in, but full page, but nothing too crazy in the volumes. And this one is, well, the cheapest one. And so here the volumes are the lowest. So for this week again, the tactical destroyer market looks healthy with normal market reactions. The most expensive one gets produced a little bit more, bringing that to the market. There was one spike, of course, due to the war here in the Jackdaw that's maybe causing a bit of an overreaction, but all in all, this looks like it is well balanced and a healthy market. Let's take a look at the cruisers next, and the Legion is going back down after working its way to, well, still a less than average price. So let's take a look at what's happening there. 150 million for the sellers, 141 for the buyers. Last 24 hours, full page coming in with 24.13 here. That's a bit more than what we've seen in the last couple of weeks, and it's a surprise that from this low price range, we're already increasing the volumes and we are decreasing the price because of that. Next up here we get the Loki, same thing, a little bit of an upswing, but being crushed very quickly. Is it from new production? Well, look at that, last 24 hours. Competition drives the price to less than 160 million isk, 23, 11, 11, 15. That's all of this in the last 24 hours. Well, it's way more than what we saw even at these bottom prices here. So again, people are trying to take advantage of this slightly increased price for these first two cruisers, but the market just isn't there for the cruisers right now, and so it's driven back down very quickly. Here we can see this for the Proteus, went down to 130 million isk. There was absolutely nothing available on the market at that time. We went up to 150 plus, not bad, but you can see the decrease in price starting, and we're already back to less than 150 million, and still 42.15. It still comes in here, which is kind of crazy. Yeah, buyers 131. very cheap. And then we've got Tengu that is also continuing its pressure, currently selling for 150 million ISK. And again, below that, look at that competition in the last 24 hours. 39 here. That's still, yeah, still 39, 15, 17, 33, 33, and then 141 for the buyers. If you like or have any plans to fly strategic cruisers, I mean, this is the time to grab one from the buyer side of things, because this actually is an oversupply reaction, which is kind of crazy considering the price that is happening at. But the Tech 3 market, cruiser market, does not seem too healthy. There just isn't enough demand to maintain decent prices or average prices for the year at the moment. And so any increased price apparently can happen even on completely abysmal availability. And then there's so much ready to jump in on the market that they get squashed super quickly. Very strange situation, and perhaps for the really long term this could be the right time to try and grab them, but who knows how that is going to evolve, of course. How much can we expect the Tech 3 cruiser ships to get back in the meta, for instance, without a CCP intervention? That is a very risky strategy to take, in my opinion. And then for our extra product this week, we're going to take a look at the Tech 1 battlecruisers, 41 minutes. Like that. The reason I'm taking a look at that is because I think some of these might actually have been in the meta a little bit for the Imperium deployment. So let's take a look at the standard battlecruisers. Here is the Harbinger, up in price from 40 to 50 million in the last month or so, and now going back down a bit. 44 million for the sellers, 41 million for the buyers. Volume wise, we're not really seeing it, so I'm actually reading this as a response to the mineral market. Next up here we've got the Oracle, also, you know, slight uptick and then a landing at 60 million at the end. Nothing too major here, so that's not great availability. 67 million for the sellers, and this again, in my opinion, is a response to the minerals going up. Prophecy, same thing, bit of a spike up to 40 million ISK. You're noticing nothing on the volumes, so it doesn't look like a Mar battlecruisers were in the meta here, but they did respond to the mineral changes or price changes. We've got the Drake. Is that one back in the meta? Well, maybe a little bit. Let's take a look at that. 44 million for the sellers, 39 million for the buyers. Availability is definitely quite a bit more than those Mar battlecruisers. You can see part of this increased price from 35 to 40 million to almost 45 million is going to be the minerals, but my theory on this one would be invasions. Actually, a passive shield Drake could be a very good response to those Triglavian patrols. So if it was part of like a Gnostic meta, feel free to put that in the comments, but this would be my theory on the Drake being able to sustain that 40 to 45 million price range even at the tail end here, which is completely counter to what we saw in the MR battlecruiser market. So this one is definitely a bit more in the meta, whether it's PvP or PvE. I would say PvE, but this one is commanding a nice bit of a premium. After that, we've got the Ferox, and this is a completely different situation. Let's take a quick look back at that Harbinger market here. Slow increase, nothing too major on the volumes. So this one not really in the meta. And here we can clearly see a June spike from 30 million to 45 million on these increased volumes. That is increased interest. That is something that is being used massively all of a sudden. I would say that this pretty much puts the Ferox in a Gnostic doctrine or meta. And as a result, right now, the response has had more time. And so you're seeing that this decline in price is much sharper. And while here we actually had an increased mineral price, this is actually going down in price through all of that. 35 million, less than that now for the sellers, 33 million for the buyers. That is pretty damn cheap for the Ferox. Not the bottom price just yet, which is actually where we took off for this spike here, but this is completely different from everything else at the moment. A decline when all the others are increasing and when mineral prices are decreasing, but a massive spike where it comes from almost 50 million is actually on a couple of days. That is bound to be major alliance activity in Nullsec. Very interesting, of course, to see that impact on the market. We still have the Naga to take a look at. I don't expect too much for that one. Flat at 50 million ISK, right? Definitely away from the bottom here, but pretty low and average. Not much to say here on this one. Maybe a couple of fleets on these increased volumes also coinciding with a bit in the war, but not really spotting too much too drastically. The Brutix, very interesting to see this one go up in price to 45 million here all of a sudden. Also counter to what I would expect the Brutix to do on the mineral price changes. So here 44.5 million. Lack of availability is pretty clear. I can't give you a good answer on this one. Is this like a meta that has been come up? I'm not seeing the volume spikes to call it the nullsec meta. Is it a PvE thing? Perhaps. Let me know in the comments if you've got any ideas. I would have expected the Myrmidon to do better on that front, but of course Myrmidon is drones again. So perhaps people are moving away from the Myrmidon, which has a volume spike but no real response to the price, and the Brutix actually coming back. Well, you get guns, you still have some drones in response, but your main DPS and your bonus of course here comes from your hybrid turrets, and so that might be why the Brutix is up in price all of a sudden. Alright, very interesting situation. So the Myrmidon I saw away from the bottom, back on an average price, but nothing too major. And one of the reasons is going to be this, of course. That's quite a few Myrmidons actually on the market, a lot more availability. Finally, we get the Talos, couple of volume spikes, and the price has not moved one iota. 64 million for the sellers, 54 million for the buyers. Again, away from the bottom, but basically just an average price. So not much to say here, except for that Brutix spike, which is a bit of a mystery. I can explain the Drake, I can explain the Ferox. I have no real way of explaining the Brutix at this point. And then we get the Minotaur ones. Here is the Cyclone, unfortunately very muted as well. Volumes, man, 25, less than that on average a day. Staying flat at a pretty low price of 32.5 million, 34 almost for the sellers. Availability is terrible. Definitely out of the meta in any way, I would say. Then we get the Hurricane, about 100 a day or less than that, but the price moves, nothing too drastic here either. And finally we get the Tornado. That could be interesting, of course, especially for gankers. This is a great ship and is actually indeed spiking up to 65 million ISK, 68 in fact for the sellers here. So the Tornado is another odd one out. A late war deployment meta or something like that has moved in to try and alpha some of those Ferox fleets. I don't know what this means exactly, but this is also a counter movement. Very interesting in my opinion. We're seeing the Amar market, basically the slowest one, you could say, moving with the minerals, everything in line with each other. Then we've got the Kaldari ones where we get the Drake, in my opinion, PvE meta, the Ferox, in my opinion, PvP meta. Then we get the Galente with one outlier. What the hell is the Brutix doing? I have no idea. And then the Minotaur as well here with the Tornado. That's also breaking out all of a sudden. Why? Very difficult to say. We don't have any real hints here on the volumes, but that makes for an interesting look at the Tech One ship market. It's been a while, but perhaps we'll take a look at a couple more as well in the upcoming weeks, because this does tell, in my opinion, a pretty cool story as well. And then we'll see, perhaps if anyone has suggestions, of course, feel free to put those in the comments. But that's gonna be it for this EVE Talk then, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time.